With the release of Encanto, there's now 60 films in the Disney Animation Canon. So today I'm going to start a 3-part series where I'm going to rank all 60 Disney animation films from the worst to the best. This is part 1. That means we're talking about the 20 worst Disney animation films. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that said, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. What do you think are the worst Disney animation films of all time? My list isn't the right list, it's just my list and I would love to see yours. With that said, let's get started. In last place, Saludos Amigos. In the 1940s, Disney Animation ran into some financial trouble due to an animator strike as well as World War II, in which case, instead of producing feature-length stories, they put together 6 of these kind of collection movies where they took multiple shorts, crammed them together, and called it a movie.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
From my perspective, these aren't really movies, but they are part of the Disney canon, thus I must include them in this list. And this one basically has this theme about traveling and tourism to Latin America. So you have Donald Duck heading down to Latin America and having a series of shorts where he learns about the culture, intercut with documentary footage about the area that he's going to. The shorts are forgettable. The runtime is only about 45 minutes long. There's just nothing here that stands out to me except for the fact of how weird it is that this is in the Disney canon. Number 59, Make Mine Music, a disjointed collection of shorts with no clear theme running throughout them. It's just a person or an item dancing to music with no clear story. And then in the middle of it, you get Casey at Bat, which just feels totally out of place with all of the other shorts included here. And in fact, of all the Disney animation films, this seems to be the one that Disney is most embarrassed of. It is the only film in the canon that is not on Disney Plus.
No way!
In order to watch it for this video, I had to buy a 20-year-old DVD of it, and every version that they release these days has been censored. They cut a couple of segments out because they find them offensive. So Disney doesn't even want you to watch this movie, so that tells you how good it is. The only reason it's not in last place is that it does have this Peter and the Wolf segment that's a classic story with some pretty classic music, therefore it stands out just a little bit and squeaks it one spot above last place. 58, Melody Time, another wartime era collection of forgettable shorts. This one with kind of a theme about the open range, being out in the wilderness, whether in the snow, in a desert, but not much here that really stands out. And the things that did stand out weren't for good reasons. A lot of the animation just doesn't really feel like Disney animation. Then there's this live action segment in the middle with people camping. It's kind of hilarious to see in the middle of a Disney animation film and for all the wrong reasons. So just another forgettable collection of shorts. Next up, 3 Caballeros, a slightly wittier and more clever wartime collection of shorts. This one just had a bit more wordplay in it that stood out a little bit. One of the plots has Donald Duck going into a book and dancing with the different people. So just a few things that had a little bit of creativity to them. Then again, there is this one short in the middle about a flying donkey that just felt a little bit like Dumbo 2.0. So nothing great here, just slightly more memorable and creative than the bottom picks. Coming in at 56, Fun and Fancy Free, another collection of shorts from the wartime era, but this time it mainly focused in on these 2 stories, in which case they're more fleshed out. There's an actual story being told. Jiminy Cricket as our host for the presentation telling us these stories. So it just feels a little bit more thought out and packaged a little bit better. The first one on here about Bongo has, once again, some of those Dumbo 2.0 vibes. The thing that really makes it stand out is the Jack and the Beanstalk bit that is actually a little story that I remember from my childhood just a little bit. It's not great, but at least it stands out as an interesting little version of Jack and the Beanstalk. But in general, not really a film, not really all that great. And even at points in time, it feels more like someone reading you a book than them telling you the story. So while it's better than most of the other wartime era collections, still far from even good. And then we have Chicken Little, a story about a chicken who doesn't fit in and thinks he might find his place in this world by joining the baseball team. And then it turns into an alien invasion story.
Wow, that was weird.
Everything about this movie feels like the low-hanging fruit that lesser studios crank out, not something that Disney would produce in the 21st century, in the decade after the Renaissance. Kind of everything about it kind of felt off to me. Even the logo at the beginning didn't look right, and then tonally, it overly relies on pop music and pop culture references. They even like sing Spice Girls Wannabe at one point in time. And so it's just a movie that it feels odd to me that Disney made this film. It tries to kind of pull it all together in the third act, but to me, it was just a mess that's beneath Disney, especially in the 21st century. At number 54, Brother Bear. If Chicken Little was overly childish and kiddie, they followed it up with the overly serious Brother Bear. At least it's overly serious for the first 25 minutes, which have plot points about a dead mother as well as a dead brother. And then all of a sudden characters turn into bears and it turns into kind of this screwball goofy comedy at times where nothing really pops except when the Strange Brew guys come up.
Good day, I'm Bob McKenzie. This is my brother Doug. How's it going, eh? Welcome to our movie, eh?
You wouldn't like us, eh? We're really gamey.
Yeah, eat hooper brains over there.
Oh, nice, eh?
That's mighty decent of you, eh? Yeah.
Which in and of itself is a little bit weird because Rick Moranis retired from acting, and of all the projects for him to return and come out of retirement for, why on earth did he pick this project? To me, it's just a very tonally uneven film that can't decide if it wants to be serious or if it wants to be corny and goofy, and it doesn't balance the two at all. And even when it comes to the animation, it looks very dull, and in fact looks kind of like a direct-to-video Disney animation sequel rather than one of their theatrical releases, and so this one to me just did not work. That'll bring us to Fantasia 2000. Now, I'm someone that has never particularly enjoyed the original Fantasia, so a second Fantasia isn't of much interest to me. Now, I could totally respect the talent on display. A bunch of the animation is absolutely gorgeous. There's a lot of nice artistic visualizations. And so if that's your sort of thing, I can see why you might enjoy either one of the Fantasias. I, however, do not enjoy this sort of thing and much prefer a story-focused film. The other thing that's just weird about this one is that they decided to bring in all of these celebrities to introduce a bunch of the segments, and they are just absolutely cringe-inducing.
I have just been informed, plays the violin. Well, so do I, big deal. Could I have my violin, please? Ah, thank you. All right, boys, let's... Oh, sorry.
And especially because of the nature of Fantasia, that's supposed to be a little bit more kind of prestige. It's inherently more artistic by trying to visually represent the music that's being played. And when you have these comedians coming in and doing very cheesy jokes, it just diminishes the effect entirely. And then there's a segment where they put Donald Duck in the Noah's Ark.
Why would they do this?
That is just a weird combination that I don't think was the best idea. Number 52, The Adventures of Ichapod and Mr. Toad, the final film from the wartime era, and it is two shorts combined into one. The first one being about Ichabod and the Sleepy Hollow story about the Headless Horseman. That is the more memorable of the two sequences because the Headless Horseman story is, of course, iconic. Of course, most of the story here about the rival love interest, the love triangle, all that stuff isn't nearly as interesting or memorable as the final 2 minutes when the Headless Horseman actually shows up and you have that chase and you have the flaming pumpkin skull being thrown, all that stuff. Iconic. The rest of it you kind of forget how long it takes to get to that point in time. The other story, Mr. Toad, isn't quite as interesting, but at least it does tell a full story where there are characters, plot points, and things that happen. So for me, this was easily the best of the wartime era. Slightly memorable, but once again, not really all that good. Next up, the Aristocats. I have no clue how controversial this placement actually is, but this is one of these films that I always think that I'm going to like it more than I actually do, and rewatching it, it simply made no impact on me. It just felt like kind of a mix of Lady and the Tramp with 101 Dalmatians, except minus all the iconic characters and songs. And almost every Disney animation film at least has something that just stands out as that unique sequence, that great song, that melody that gets stuck in your head. And there's just simply nothing like that with this film for me, in which case it's just a film that I'm aware that it exists. I've seen it many times throughout the decades, but it just leaves no mark on me. I don't have specific even criticisms of it. It's just a movie that just does not leave any mark whatsoever. Kicking off our top 50, Home on the Range, a movie that's memorable only for being the cow film, but it's unassuming, it's harmless, it's just trying to be a good time, and it's kind of a fun time. And after watching the overly serious Brother Bear right before this movie, I kind of appreciated that it's a film trying really hard to at least put some sort of grin on my face. Now, certainly, it's a very kiddie film, except the point in time where it makes the breast implant jokes about whether udders are real or not.
Why?
But like most of the films from the post-Renaissance, I'm just very confused as to, after they made so many great films during the 90s, I don't understand why they made so many of these just low-brow, forgettable, low-hanging fruit kiddie films like Home on the Range during the zeros. Number 49, Fantasia. As I said before with Fantasia 2000, this is simply not my thing. Even in the introduction of the film, they make it clear that a lot of the segments aren't narrative-based film. They're just visualizations of art, trying to show off what you can do with animation when combined with great music. And I can appreciate the talent on display. A lot of the things they do are very cool, but would I ever choose to just sit down and watch Fantasia on my own? No. Outside of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which of course is an iconic, classic little segment for Mickey, outside of that one, this just isn't something that I would choose to watch on my own. So I can't put it higher up on the list, even though it accomplishes what it's going for rather well. I just do not care about the thing that it's going for whatsoever. Then we have Oliver and Company. To the best of my knowledge, this might be the first film that I saw in theaters. At least it's the first one that I have vague memories of seeing it in theaters. As for the movie itself, it's kind of a by-the-numbers cat and dog version of Oliver Twist that's cute enough while not being particularly memorable. It's also a movie that doesn't feel all that much like a Disney film. Even the New York City setting with Coca-Cola ads in the background feels like something a different studio would put out and lacks that Disney identity. Likewise, it's a movie that's just jam-packed with songs, but they're actual pop songs, not Disney songs as you kind of expect from Disney films. And so just a lot of things were just didn't feel like a movie that Disney would put out. It's also a movie that came out right before The Little Mermaid, which of course kicked off the Disney Renaissance and has become this classic film that people have been watching for 30 years. And it came out the same day as The Land Before Time, which sparked roughly 1 million direct-to-video sequels. And it just feels like this movie just kind of got lost in all of it as the end of an era that wasn't the best for Disney animation. And for me, not one of the more memorable films that they've put out. Number 47, The Black Cauldron. Now, growing up, I actually read the books that the Black Cauldron was based off of, but I'd never seen the film, which was kind of interesting to me because I only read like 2 books when I was growing up. They made a movie out of one of them, and I was never able to watch it. I was curious, like, how did that happen that I never watched the Black Cauldron? Well, it turns out the movie was such a box office failure that Disney didn't release it on home video until 1998. And that will do it. So I finally watched it for the very first time in preparation for this video, and the animation was much more impressive than I was expecting. Like, the budget for the film is certainly on display with what they did with the animation, but when it comes to the actual story, it feels like a greatest hits of fantasy tropes with the magic sword, the princess in distress, the big sacrifice at the end. It's all the stuff that you're supposed to have in a fantasy story, but without the runtime to be able to properly set up those moments or develop them, in which case it has all the stuff you're supposed to have, but all of it just rings hollow, unfortunately. And that's why it's difficult to tell a story of this scope and size in only 90 minutes. Likewise, it is awfully dark for a movie for kids. There's skeletons and demons and dragons putting children and animals in peril from beginning to end. And so while I did read the books, I do like the genre. I don't think they were able to fully pull it off here. That'll bring us to The Sword in the Stone. Now, the King Arthur legend feels like prime material for a great Disney animation film. But unfortunately here, it feels like they picked the least interesting direction to go with the King Arthur character. Did you ever want to see King Arthur turned into a fish, a squirrel, and a bird for the sake of education? Yeah, me neither, but we do have a movie where that takes place. In fact, this plays out a little bit more like Cinderella for boys, except it's not even as interesting as that sounds. So while the characters are kind of fun, the source material itself is interesting, the direction they take it, not so much. And even the part where he pulls the sword out of the stone feels a little bit tacked on at the end. And so this is one that I wanted to like a lot more than I actually liked it. Number 45, Dinosaur, an interesting visual experiment combining CGI dinosaurs with live action scenery in the background that in and of itself makes it a unique film, but at the same time, there's a reason that that technique didn't continue on afterwards, because it can be a little bit distracting. This is also an interesting experiment in that it doesn't use Disney's usual bag of tricks. It's not a musical. It's not really designed to be a big overt comedy, in which case it's a film for children that's awfully serious at the same time. There are things about the story that are compelling and interesting, but it's kind of a weird mix when you're trying to aim a story for such a young age group while it's about anthropomorphized dinosaurs fleeing an extinction event.
Not a great plan.
It's awfully heavy for a movie designed for children. Now, the big standout here was the James Newton Howard score that, like all of his scores, is pretty phenomenal. But when you have these dinosaurs fleeing for their life and having moments of victory and his score comes in, it's tough to not feel a lot of big emotions. Next up, The Rescuers, a fun enough concept about a pair of rescuers trying to save a child. Our odd couple in the mix have nice chemistry between the two of them. The story has a clear conflict, clear villains. We know what we're aiming for, so there's constant story forward momentum. But at the same time, the environment that they chose just feels awfully drab, and I think it sucks the fun out of what should be a pretty safe, easy adventure to have fun with, but because of the context where it's taking place and how dark it can get at times, it just kind of diminishes the effects all throughout the entire film. So it's one of these movies that I always think I'm going to enjoy it more than I actually do. The setup is there, the characters are there, but in the execution, it just loses a little something. Real quick before I give you my final picks for the bottom three, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your picks for the worst Disney animation films. My list isn't the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. And this is a very difficult list to make when you're talking about 60 movies released over 80 plus years years where the first Disney animation film was the original feature-length animated film, and Encanto is the most recent one ever created, in which case that's a lot of variety in context of when it was created, budgets, animation technology, advances in storytelling, and our subjective experience of when we grew up, which movies we watched as a child. It makes it very difficult to create a list like this, so if I need hot takes, I do apologize. I'm just trying to give my honest opinion on all of this. Also, I have done a bunch of animation rankings in the past. The Pixar movies, all of the DreamWorks films, all the Illumination films. You can check those out right up here in this playlist when this video is over. Number 43, Ralph Breaks the Internet. Now, it is so disappointing to me that this movie is on this list because I loved the original Wreck-It Ralph. I was so excited to check this movie out, and I actually really enjoyed the first half of this movie. The basic setup about Vanellope breaking the video game and they're trying to fix it, so they go onto the internet, all the pop culture references, the 21st century technology in video games, all that stuff, I had a lot of fun with it. Now, certainly a bunch of the internet references were dated right out of the gate and a little bit cringe-inducing, but there was still a good bit of fun to be had. And unfortunately, though, once the initial plot starts to get resolved about 60-70% of the way through the movie, they introduce this whole other threat and villain so that they can have this big, gigantic showdown in the third act. And I actively dislike the entire last third of this movie.
You've made a huge mistake.
Feels like a solid sequel with a really bad third movie tacked on at the end, and it sours me on this entire film. And to be entirely clear, I have 3 kids under the age of 10, and all 3 of them have gone through extensive Wreck-It Ralph phases. So I've seen both Wreck-It Ralph movies many times, and have a bunch of adorable footage of my youngest going, Roro, Roro, Roro. Who is it? That's right. When she wanted to watch Wreck-It Ralph, and every time I watch the first half of this movie, I'm like, hey, this isn't so bad. And every time I watch the final third, I'm like, oh yeah, I hate all of this. So unfortunately, this movie has to be in my bottom 20. Number 42, Bambi. Now I imagine it's probably a flaming hot take to have Bambi in the 20 worst Disney animated films of all time, but this is one that I just don't enjoy all that much. Sure, the animals are cute. There's several of these shots of Bambi tripping and falling over that are, of course, iconic and memorable. Thumper, a fun character with a name that lines up with his behavior really nicely, so it sticks in your brain. But when it comes to the actual story, it's intentionally just kind of this cycle of life. Life, birth, death, giving birth to your own children. And so there's just not, to me, anything all that compelling. It's sort of like if you did The Lion King, but removed all of the forward story momentum and compelling stuff. And so you just have the circle of life, in which case the big thing that people remember about Bambi is cute animals, and Bambi's mom dies, traumatizing kids for nearly 80 years now. So for me, I rewatched it last night. It was one of the last movies I watched in preparation for this video, and I just don't dig it all that much. Well, of course, I realize that it is a very important film in the history of cinema. Finishing up the bottom 20, Treasure Planet. Now, this is a movie that I always think that I'm going to enjoy more than I actually do, because the basic concept of taking Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island and doing this sci-fi steampunk version of it as a Disney animation film, that sounds like it'll be right up my alley. Likewise, I love the animation style that's this combination of 2D animation with these 3D animation backgrounds. But in the actual execution, it doesn't come together for me. I just don't care enough about the characters. There's some things that just feel like misfires, where there's a creature that speaks in farts and the language is called flatulence. get the joke, stuff like that just doesn't really interest me all that much. But I think at the core, a big part of the problem is that you're trying to tell this big, epic story that would make for a really good PG-13, 2.5-hour long movie, but they're squishing it into the PG rating in a 95-minute runtime, in which case a bunch of stuff gets underdeveloped. We're rushing through plot points, rushing through world building to just get to the end of the film. And that squeezes all the life out of it for me, which is frustrating because I really think there's a version of this film that I would be very into given the basic concept and the studio involved, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't come together for me. So those are my picks for the 20 worst Disney animation films. Now, if one of your favorites was in the bottom 20 and you're frustrated by that, keep in mind, Disney is a phenomenal animation studio, so it's a really tough competition when it comes to making this list. Be sure to come back over the next week where I'm going to put out parts 2 and 3, where I'm going to give you my top 40 Disney animation films, and those videos are going to be a lot more positive than this one. But if you want more content from me before that, check out that playlist right over there with my rankings of the Pixar films, DreamWorks, Illumination. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.